Hello and welcome to the Viva Ya podcast. I'm your host and main character for this show. I'd like to think I'm the main character in my story, but when it comes to everyone else's story, I'm just not, and that's totally okay. One of my favorite memes comes from the formerly Northwest MCM Wholesale. It says, "There are other people in this thrift store, but I'm the main character." What I love about that so much is that it's making fun of our sense of uniqueness. I really do believe that we're all incredibly unique, but sometimes there's big swaths of people who aren't as concerned with expressing their uniqueness and prefer to express their sameness. And that's not inherently a bad thing or wrong. It's just I don't identify with that. And I do think it's possible to have a whole bunch of people who are expressing their uniqueness, but also pull together as a community. It's always similarities that pull us together, and we always have much more in common and much more similar about ourselves than we do different. But differences are key defining things, and it's a very human thing to do, to just be like, I'm not into that. This is what I'm into, or I don't like that. And defining yourself based on a reaction or response to not liking something is not being a punk. Well, it is being a punk. It's just you being authentic. Anyways, fun thought for the day. If we went around saying, who's the main character on your podcast? That presumes a kind of narrative. And there is a narrative here. My life story. I'm trying to share my life story. I am actually a very private person in my day-to-day IRL life. Online, I have a barrier. You don't have a comment section yet on all podcasts, and I'm probably going to just, as soon as I can, disable that, because it's super easy for anybody to just anywhere decide, listen to something for a second and leave a comment just to be a shit poster. And I'm not super into that. Anyways, today we're talking about my life, and more specifically, my past life. My past life as a full-time traveler, blogger, and then towards the very end of that, podcaster. And we're going to see if you can guess by the end of the show which of these I no longer am. I'll give you a hint. It's just one. So, from 2016 to 2021, for the most part, I wasn't on a lease anywhere. There were places where we maybe paid rent for a bit, where I was teaching English in Spain for a couple of years. But we basically were not in our home base for about 4 or 5 years, not tethered to any particular location, with the freedom, more or less, to go wherever we wanted. In theory. I don't know. I want to emphasize that we got to travel all over the place. I really enjoyed exploring certain things, and I enjoyed the adventure, for sure. A lot of people think it's a dream life or a life to aspire to, one of just traveling indefinitely. And I think that's an interesting thing to desire or dream for, because I kind of happened upon this lifestyle and it wasn't a personal dream or ambition of mine. It was more of a way to get out of New York City and figure out my other options for where I can live. I've moved around a lot in my life, and I just kind of want to stay put somewhere. And I've been wanting to stay put somewhere. It was more that I was on the search for a place where I could put down some roots, so to speak. So basically, I'm going to tell everything in 3 parts. I like working with 3s and 5s. 3 parts in that I'm going to talk about my life as a full-time traveler, as a blogger, and as a podcaster. And what are the major lessons I learned from those things? So first I'm going to talk a bit about each, what it was like, what was my life like in those particular times and places. And then, based on that information, dig in a little bit more into each in terms of a major lesson I learned. And there's no shortage of them, but these are the ones that are at the forefront of my mind that are informing me as I move forward. So, during that time that we were full-time traveling, we started a blog to kind of explain to people what exactly we were doing. And part of the way that we were full-time traveling was via house sitting, meaning pet owners were looking for someone to take care of their pets, their home, while they're away. And then pet carers or pet care providers, pet sitters, house sitters, you might want to call some of them, are looking to, in exchange for accommodations, like take care of your pets and home. So when I was in Spain, for example, when there was long weekends, we would try to line up house sits that were in other cities, in other countries. It was a great way to get around and travel and really reduce your overhead costs. And it was a major part of the foundation of how we traveled full time. So during the blog era, we were writing about it. We were writing about what we were doing. And then we were also creating things that were of either importance to us or things we felt our audience was interested in. For a good few years there, we were really churning it out. We were really knocking out the content. About 150 posts in total. Often each of them was 2,000, 3,000, 4,000 words. Many of our biggest, most popular ones are often actually 6,000, 7,000, 8,000 words. We kind of had a very old school blog style in that we weren't afraid of long posts. We liked to cram a lot of information into our posts, and we put a lot of time, energy, and effort into them. And then when the pandemic hit, it kind of grounded us. We couldn't really travel. And a lot of what provided inspiration for our content was things we experienced while we were traveling. And it wasn't just us sharing, oh, we went to this place, we went to that place. We would just, certain things we had kind of like a lifestyle going on where we were staying somewhere maybe for a month, 2 months. With Spain, there was an exception, but often we were in places for a few months at a time. And it really kind of gives you a different kind of perspective. I would say it gives you a residence perspective on a place versus being there as a tourist. But during the pandemic, we decided we were going to do podcasting. And we started a podcast. My ex-partner and I co-hosted. And it did really well. We were putting it out on a weekly basis, and we did that for well over a year before we realized we wanted to kind of also start another podcast based on how successful that experience was. And we started to see some overlap in our audiences online on the website versus on the podcast who was listening. And then we also had like an Instagram for our website, and that is its own little ecosystem of interaction. And these things played a huge part in our lives, mostly because we were able to monetize it all. If you look at full-time travel, it wasn't something so much that was monetized, but we subsidized it with house sitting. The blog and the podcast, without going into too much detail, because this is not a podcast about how to monetize your online endeavors. This is a podcast about me being the main character. They did not only make us money, they helped make us a living. And it was passive income. It wasn't like 1 hour worked equals 1 hour pay. It was a bunch of things we did that created opportunities for things to be for income to be passively generated. It's kind of a misnomer, but it makes sense in terms of how you accrue the income. Meaning that you can decide to take a break for a month or two, and it might affect you down the road, but it's essentially not going to immediately affect how much you make in that moment because you're not making money on an hourly kind of time basis. But there is a relationship to time, and often I think the key thing to understand about passive income is you can put a lot of work into earning and generating one and not see the results for a year or two down the line. In case any of you get some quick, rich scheme ideas popping into your head, monetizing online stuff is not a way to get rich. It's just not. If you want a passive income, I think it's more important that you gradually transition into that lifestyle. You got to see if you can create something that makes money. And that can't be the main sole driver of why. It can be something that rides along with you in like the passenger seat, so to speak, but it can't be the main motivation. It ultimately comes down to a really strong impulse and drive to provide something of value to people. So, full-time travel is unsustainable. It's not a life that I think should be sustained. I think it can be a way of life for a minute, for like a transitory point in your life. But I don't think you can live in a transitory state all the time. There's this balance that needs to be achieved between like the static and the dynamic in our life. The philosopher Jean-Paul Sartre talks about this a bit. It talks about what makes a human authentic is recognizing the duality we have of all the static things in our life, the defined things in our life, and this constant loop of redefining ourselves. For example, you could say, right now I'm a student, but I will be a teacher. You're not a teacher yet, but not being a teacher yet is a defining characteristic of you because you're a student and you're working towards that future. It's also a recognition of your agency in any given moment, you know? So being inauthentic would be denying your ability to create or change a situation. And you can be too much on one end. You can live your life too statically, I think, and too comfortably. And then there's the other end where you live in kind of a transient state. And I've seen this as something that happens on the Camino. The Camino, popularly known in the States or other places that speak English, but what I'm talking about in Spain is El Camino de Santiago. And this is the way to Santiago. It is a medieval pilgrimage. People have been doing it for all kinds of reasons forever now. Often people maybe decide, I'm going to do this pilgrimage on foot, walking from this city to that city because they're grieving somebody or they lost a job or they're going through major life changes. But I've also met people who've done this thing, and I can talk about my experience on the Camino as well, that they're just kind of doing them all the time. But yeah, you can't travel indefinitely. It's not sustainable unless I want to like throw up in my mouth when I say this, digital nomad. I hate that word. Digital nomad to me just sounds so obnoxious. I don't like it. I don't like the word. I feel like digital nomads, the people who created the word digital nomads also created the word or this new thing of calling people creatives, which I also can't stand. It's like taking the word creative, which is an adjective, and then turning it into a noun. Maybe because people don't like the way creator sounds, but I think it has more to do with people who want to consider themselves as artists, who are doing things that are not traditionally considered artistry or artists, right? So I think they're trying to give themselves, not just validation, but they're trying to be like legitimized. And they want to go around saying, I'm a digital nomad creative. And I'm just like, it makes me picture the archetype of a person on their laptop designing some kind of visual art, like a graphic designer, but on a beach somewhere in Bali. People trying to act like this is just some kind of like paradise of a life, which couldn't be farther from the truth. Traveling has a lot of drudgery. I don't think it's exciting to be crammed on a plane. I don't think it's exciting to be crammed on a bus. I don't think it's exciting to be wading my way through crowds all the time just to get from point A to B because I'm tired and I'm carrying 40, 50 pounds of my life on my back. Traveling as a full-time traveler meant I lived out of a couple of bags. And not like grocery store bags. I'm talking something that, like a big travel backpack. By that, I think I mostly traveled with a big hiking backpack that are designed essentially as like a really nice sack is essentially what it is. You can just fill it up. They're measured in liters. And then I also had a more typical book bag, like school bag style backpack that I'd wear on the front of me. And I could carry everything on me without having to have it dangle from my hands. I didn't want to have little rolly things. But I say all this to be like, yes, if we made more money, I could see it being more sustainable. I often talked about how I'd know I'd made it if I could start just whimsically paying for smoothies every time I want breakfast somewhere. Travel, I feel like, inherently disrupts the homeostasis in your body. So if you can travel slower, it makes it much easier. Like imagine traveling across the world walking. It can be a lot physically demanding, but I think in terms of everything else, it's better for your body. I just feel like it's all so disorienting to be flung across the world. And within a few hours too, these are things we're just starting to learn and understand because we've had unprecedented modes of travel, but it's been completely natural and normal for humans to have traveled all over the place, all over the world for most of our existence. This is not just a recent new thing. And just read some anthropology and archaeology and you'll see. Another lesson I learned from full-time travel being unsustainable. And this is kind of related. It's like a sub-lesson of the unsustainability part. Unsustainable is strongly implying that I can't meet all my needs is the way I do in a sustainable life, right? Without destroying things in the long run. When we say this path is unsustainable, that climate change is unsustainable, or like the technology we're using in our lifestyles are unsustainable, it means it's going to all crash and burn at some point, right? A key important thing that is having community. A fulfilled, content, joyous life requires community. We're not meant to do this stuff on our own, and it put a huge, demanding, taxing burden on both my ex-partner and I. We're social creatures. Humans are social creatures. There's no way around it. I'm an introvert, mostly. Doesn't mean I can't be around people. It just means certain social situations are a bit more costly for my energy. Psychological definition of introvert is you recharge when you're alone. You deplete when you're around people. Not that people are exhausting, but that's just how it works. And you can tell based on how you feel later, the next day, etc. An extrovert recharges while they're around people, and they kind of slowly, sneakily deplete when they're alone. My reality is shaped by the people in my life. My ex-partner and I, we had to become each other's community. This is a big mistake that a lot of couples do. This is an idea I'm kind of pulling from relationship advice or relationship theories or whatever you want to call it. We often try to make this other significant person in our life our everything. Like we go to them for the things we normally would expect to get from a village, you know? We choose them for everything. Like that's what happens when it's just the two of you living your life together and you don't really see other people except in passing. It made it really hard to maintain friendships. You can have long distance friendships, but it's just different. You're just no longer really in each other's lives when you're doing something long distance. Let's just be honest. So in short, it's hard to build community when you're always moving. Okay, so now let's get into some more esoteric blogging specific things. I'm going to talk about some lessons I learned from blogging. I prefer to do personal blogging, which there wasn't a lot of room for in the blogging we were doing before. Very quickly, our blogging became, if there's a word for it, it just became like a resource. It just became a place where we provided content that helped you do something. There's tons of things I learned in terms of just skills, whether it be content strategy, copywriting, designing a website. Like we did everything. And I can talk about those things more in future episodes. But I mostly want to focus on the route we took, which became kind of impersonal. And what really motivated me from the get-go was the potential to connect with people based on my writing and sharing of my experiences in the written form. And sometimes that happened, but it felt kind of rare and occasional. It became more of connecting over me writing a how-to or several things to keep in mind for when you're doing this or that. We were really in that world for a second, and we were grinding away, putting out really good quality stuff while we looked around and saw that people in our ultra niche were just not putting out the same kind of quality stuff. There's a lot of people who just chase traffic and money, and we did that to an extent too to help monetize the endeavor, and we had a lot of cool things we were getting involved in. But ultimately, I kind of craved, and I'm realizing now, and I'm scratching that itch now, is that I wanted to actually blog in the way that bloggers used to originally blog. But now that they've become monetized, or people see you can potentially monetize blogs, they've just become like another arm of like marketing and promotion for so many businesses and so many people who don't actually care about that written form or that way of connecting with people. It's more just another extension of their business entity. And then related to overemphasizing traffic, that's what we did. We chased traffic a bit too much. We relied too heavily on Google search providing us our traffic. While we kind of maintained a core audience, our website in terms of viewage rapidly expanded once we were doing all the SEO shit to make stuff rank on Google. And man, has Google changed a ton. This has just been part of the trajectory of Google overemphasizing monetization for their, if you want to call it a product, their search, their internet indexer thing. And now it's shit. It's complete shit. How many of us can't stand going to the front page and it feels like we have to like sort through it to find anything of value, ignore the AI or put, minus AI. It's just a shit show. It's a mess. And it really sucked to have invested so much time and energy in something that ultimately put us at the whim of an algorithm. And the lesson learned is I'm definitely not going to be beholden to an algorithm going forward with my content creation. Now, those things can help, but I'm not going to rely on those things to connect me with people who want to support what I'm doing. They can be a useful tool in the box, but they can't be the main tool, because then once the main tool stops doing the thing it's supposed to do, it kind of fucks up everything else. But what can I ultimately say about my lessons learned from podcasting? Definitely way more sustainable. Podcasting is just, it can be time consuming in the same way that writing can be time consuming, but sometimes it's much easier for me to talk for 15 to 20, 30 minutes on a topic I feel well versed in than for me to write it and type it out. I think a lot of the people that ended up on our website because of Google traffic weren't necessarily looking for long, exhaustive, in-depth articles. They're just trying to find whatever's going to get them the thing they need the quickest. And a lot of the Google traffic, search engine traffic, people are just looking for one or two things. They don't really care about what's going on with the rest of your online endeavor. But it does provide the potential to put more eyeballs, and then eventually you do catch people who do connect with those things. And I have definitely ended up on websites, blogs, etc., and still follow to this day, maybe because I was originally just searching something and I just found something I really connected with. And that's also probably something to be said about how much better the Google search of like 2010 used to be compared to 15 years later, which is now, and it's just absolute garbage. The front page is just, it's a nightmare. So I still like to write, but podcasting, as you can tell, is definitely one of my mediums. I enjoy speaking. I enjoy listening, and podcasting gives me the opportunity to do both. Ultimately, in my kind of concluding thing for all of this, is that the biggest lesson I really got from podcasting, but also built on the foundation we have from blogging. And this is something that's not apparent to people who haven't invested a lot of time and energy into putting out consistent, regular quality work online or anything that's created. I think as human beings, when we create things, we want them to be experienced. We're social creatures, right? And so anyone who's spent a lot of time creating and sharing something knows how much time, energy, effort, work it takes to like grow that. But if you stick it out enough, I think everyone learns this eventually, especially now with the age of the internet. There's an audience for everything. You got an impulse to create stuff and try your best in organic ways to share it. No one likes when we just foist shit upon people. Or I talk about how I like my life being separate. I'm very private about my real life. My IRL life is very private. So I don't want to walk into rooms and people talk to me about what I'm working on. I don't want that. And it's totally possible to do that. You can look for that particular audience. And when I say there's an audience for everything, it also leads into what I've learned is it's entirely possible to cultivate and nurture and grow a small, engaged, supportive audience. That's the big, big, big takeaway I took from all these past endeavors. There's going to be people out there that just connect with you and want to support you. And supporting you can look like just engaging. It can just be listening. I would say I'm a lurker when it comes to being online. I rarely actually interact or engage. I just mostly observe. And that's, I think, a big chunk of people, if not most people. And the most important thing you can do is if you're just yourself, if you're genuine and authentic, it's going to reach the right people. People really valued the content we put out because it was honest. It wasn't completely written and made and structured around making money or getting traffic, or it was just, we wanted to make something that connects with the right people. And when you see those numbers grow, we can spend all day trying to analyze statistics, but ultimately what I think encourages people to keep doing it is the growth is validating. It tells you you're doing something that people like, right? If that's your baseline, like you just want to do things that people like, you might have a different experience. I mean, how many of us have seen online an influencer with millions and millions of people following them, but if they actually create something they want engagement with, most of us have a very shallow relationship with a lot of these like mega influencers. But sometimes we have like really deeper ones, but it depends. Like, did you create that whole persona just on a free social media platform? Or are you being intentional about where people find you, the infrastructure you're building to create and support what you're putting out there? And so for me, seeing how other people coming up, startups, bigger businesses, they pour so much money into trying to get an engaged audience or buying followers, all these kind of things. And there's just no shortcuts. There's no shortcuts. You can sponsor stuff, do ads, and ads, there's, it's $1 billion, probably $1 trillion industry now. And why? Because the more eyeballs on something, if your conversion rates, if you're trying to get 1 out of 1,000 people to buy something and you got 10 million of those people, well, now you're talking numbers that matter, right? But if that's going for a different thing. That's different goals, different objective. For me, my goal is to connect with people who want to support what I'm doing. And that can just be baseline listening. I love that. I'm so grateful for that. And I know it's entirely possible to only have those kinds of people. I'm really sticking my neck out there. There's a ton of vulnerable self-disclosure that I'm going to be doing on a regular basis. And someone can come in and just be a shitty person if they want to. One of the reasons I'm into podcasting is that there isn't a comic section yet. I'm starting to see stuff pop up on Spotify here and there, but that's not what I'm looking into. I want people who are interested in what I'm doing, they get it, and they want to be a part of it. So thank you so much for being here. Thank you for supporting this show. And if you want to support it even further, there's always share it with someone who it makes sense, who you think will connect with it. Don't just share this because you know me and you want to support me. People connect because they have something meaningful to share, something that really matters to them. And I really hope that I provide something of value to your life. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll catch you next time. You got to drink plenty of water to reduce those mouth noises. Because when it's smacking around, it means you got dry mouth, which is something that happens to me quite often while I'm recording because I'm talking out loud. Anywho.